welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today I've got with me producer Matt Wilkinson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Indeed, indeed. Now, we're going to do 3 films that impacted on everything in your adult life very soon. You've given me a list of 3.
Yeah.
But before that, I just thought, I want to point out for the listener that maybe if a listener who's been listening to a lot of the podcasts will have heard about your films through the people that I've covered, the filmmakers I've spoken to already. I went back while I was arranging this with Matt and discovered I've interviewed 7 filmmakers, which I think, unofficially speaking, might be the most any one producer I've covered their films. I mean, I didn't plan to, Matt, but I've happily done it.
Very honoured, very honoured. I've been waiting for somebody to catch up with my career, and it just might be easier.
I've unofficially documented it in its own unique way. So that was, I mean, the films are covered for, and I'll put links in the show notes, was Burial most recently, Choose or Die, The Power, Muscle that then led me to thank one of my favourite interviews. I got to interview Jared Johnson about the making of Tony as well.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, wonderful film.
I mean, I had such a great conversation about Muscle because it is a stunning film that I was like, would you do an interview about Tony as well now? And he was like, yeah, sure. Because he'd enjoyed the chat, so that was nice. Say Your Prayers, Double Date, and Bricks. Bricks seemed such a long time ago. That was
Nev Pearce's short film.
Yeah, I remember meeting Nev Pearce at his. I think was that the one that played at Fright Fest? Because that was how I ended up speaking to him. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah.
So it's nice to have you on the show, and you've got a film coming up called The Last Sentinel, which is, from what you were saying before we started recording, is 10 years in the making. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that film is?
It might even be 12 years in the making. It is a sci-fi thriller, futuristic sci-fi thriller.
Yeah.
And it's set on a military outpost in the middle of the ocean after an environmental disaster. And only 2 continents remain. And it's a kind of them and us scenario. And the military outpost is defending one continent in face of an impending threat from the other continent. And it's manned by 4 soldiers. And the enemy doesn't come. And the longer they wait for the enemy, the more it erodes their identity, because you're kind of not soldiers unless you're, or certainly for them, you're not soldiers unless you're involved in something. And as they kind of go quietly mad waiting for this impact, they all start to tear each other apart. So it's kind of a psychological pot boiler thriller. Were
you involved right from conception through to the finished thing, or did you come on at a later stage? Or
no, I was second on of 5 producers, ultimately, I think. Lead producer was a guy called Ben Pullen. He got inspired by the idea. He found a writer. The writer wrote a script. They found what then was a first-time feature director who was a graduate of the NFTS. And Ben hadn't produced a film yet. And he just set about figuring out ways to put it together. And at the time, I had a deal with Pathé UK, and I was trying to bring in sort of lower budget genre material.
Yeah.
And I think Ben just took a punt on me to see if I could get it away at Pathé. And although Pathé didn't go for it in the end, for various reasons, I sort of felt akin to the project. I just thought it was a very intelligent, character-led story that was also a really exciting genre film, or had the potential to be an exciting genre film.
Yeah.
And I kind of went along for the journey from there. But it just turned out to be an incredibly long journey.
From a writing development point of view, that kind of fantastic sort of high concept and dystopian future, what do you remember being like some of the storytelling challenges for the writer in terms of building that on paper? Because on paper, that's quite hard, what you've just described.
It is quite hard, but Ben chose really wisely with the writer he went to. And it was quite an experienced writer anyway, so it wasn't the first time gig for the writer, but he just feels very comfortable in those spaces of dialogue exchange and the gaps between what's spoken and what's not spoken, and just building scenes around tension. And it was just exactly what that story needed. So I think for the writer, it was a bit of a joy to write, and certainly it was the script first and foremost that brought me into it. It was just a film that had lots of iterations. We've had lots of financial partners over the years.
Yeah.
We had lots of different casting iterations over the years. We were going to do it in the UK. Ultimately, we ended up doing it in Estonia, but we did it in Estonia with German financiers. And it's just one of those things. Certain projects that are a bit challenging.
Yeah.
If you don't end up, with studio backing or now streamer backing, and if you don't end up with a certain level of cast, then it just becomes quite a difficult exercise to jigsaw together enough money to really do justice to something that's ambitious.
Brilliant. Well, look, without further ado, let us jump into 3 films that impacted everything in your adult life. Now, you've given me 3. Now, before we get into it, can I ask you, how much head scratching did you do to get it down to these 3? How long was your long list before you got your short list?
So you gave me a steer when we spoke the last time we met that's obviously clouded my judgment entirely. You basically said to me something along the lines of, most people go for formative films from their teenage years.
Yeah.
And I remember being about 16 or 17 and being obsessed about the idea of having a top 10 favorite film list. And I carried it everywhere with me in my head. And I just knew exactly what my top 10 favorite films are. And I kind of never updated it after I was 18. I sort of didn't go back there. So when you said most people go for the formative years, I just thought back to what the top 10 list was. And then I kind of thought, well, some of these are a little bit cliche, so I don't necessarily want to reach for the cliche ones. So the 3 I chose are hopefully slightly left of centre, although I know they're very populist films among filmmakers.
Everyone I've done so far has been populist. I don't think before we're kind of 16 where about 16 we start to believe we're cooler than now, but we're not fully aware. We're not fully formed in that kind of thinking. There are just these films are just magic and they hold your attention, you know.
Yeah, and I could have chosen 3 different films from that list, and there's certainly one of my favourite films of all time is probably David Fincher's Seven, and that was definitely on that list. But yeah, I for whatever reason, because they hold a special place in my heart, because maybe they're a little bit weirder, because maybe they're a little bit less conventional, I plumped for these 3.
Okay, well, look, what I'm going to do is, and I'm saying this to you and the audience at the same time, which is I'll take them in reverse date order in terms of their release date. So I'll prompt you, and then we'll set the clock going for 5 minutes. So what I'm just going to do now is, for the listeners' benefit now, the rules are quite simple. I've got 3 films. We're going to talk about them for 5 minutes at a time. And when the alarm goes off, which is going to sound like this.
Terrifying.
You can hear that at your end.
I can.
So when that'll signify the final. Obviously, finish your thought. This isn't like, isn't Mastermind. It's not. The things everyone has to stop. Although some people do. Some people just stop. It's completely up to you. But it's just more of a fact that for the show's benefit, it means that we can force ourselves to give each film equal attention, as opposed to 14 minutes on one of them and then 60 seconds on the other 3.
I'm definitely going to struggle to do 14 minutes on any of them, but yeah.
Well, look, let's start at the top then. 1975's The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Clock is ticking. What do you remember first about, like, when did you first see this, and how did you first see it? Where did this come across your radar?
It's going to be a slightly fudged answer, because I honestly don't remember when I genuinely first saw it or when it was first drawn to my attention. But I remember that when I was a younger teen, so let's say like about 13 probably, my parents had brought me this thing for Christmas, which was brilliant, and I absolutely loved it. And it's hard to describe, but it was about the size of a ghetto blaster, and it had a tiny, like 5-inch black and white telly. It had a cassette player, and it had a radio, and it was this unit.
Fancy.
And they bought it for me as a Christmas present. And I don't know if they bought it for me because they thought I was going to play my tapes on it or whatever. But the most important part of it was that it had a TV on it. And what it meant was that when I went to bed at night, no one was really the guardian of what I watched. So I'd turn on my little black and white TV and I'd scroll through the channels, and then there was probably only like 4 channels. And I'd find movies and I'd get obsessed with movies. And I think maybe I discovered it on one of those journeys, and I probably didn't even watch it from the start. And I just didn't understand what it was. It was just so alien to me in like every possible direction. I'd never heard of the stage show. I'd never heard of the kind of cult of this film, certainly in terms of how it exists in popular culture now. I was just watching this weird, dark, macabre, but playful, obviously musical, obviously all kinds of things about gender identity that I probably didn't understand and sexuality that I didn't necessarily understand, all wrapped it up in this weird, wonderful and warped tale. And I think I was just like sort of jaw hanging slightly open as I watched it. And even things like the start of the film, like I can't think of a more arresting image than those bright red lips singing this incredible open song. And it runs for the entire duration of the opening credits that you're being sung to by this sort of invisibly faced pair of lips. And just from that moment on, I was totally drawn into it. But also in terms of kind of structure and storytelling, like the breaking of the fourth wall with Charles Gray as your narrator, and how certain scenes go to stills and he's kind of annotating them and he's sort of alluding to a backstory that he's not ready quite to tell you about yet. And then just the kind of fish out of water narrative of the simplicity of their car breaking down, then they find themselves at the house, and it's kind of the worst place you can ever ask for help. And I think in terms of, maybe subconsciously in terms of my own storytelling, the idea of seeking help in the worst possible place has definitely remained with stories that interest me. Okay. The idea that if you turn to the wrong person at the wrong time, it's something that can totally unravel your life. And however tangential that seems, that probably led to me getting involved in projects like Muscle. You know, don't turn to the wrong person in a moment of crisis, because you never know what the undoing is going to be after that situation. But I also just found it totally joyful as well. And it was probably the first time I ever saw Meatloaf in an acting role. I mean,
it's interesting when you said you can't remember where you saw it, and that kind of the idea of not being aware of its cultural significance. I mean, I used to go to the under-16s disco in Bolton at the Ritzy, and they played the Time Warp there. I had no idea of where that song was from, apart from hearing it at the under-16s disco. So it was a long time till I saw the film after that I even knew it was from a film.
And I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound desperately weird. So I found another friend at secondary school years and years later, probably when I was about 16, who was also equally obsessed with it for reasons unknown. And we could just quote the film. And even now, lines from the film pop into my head in certain situations. And I've just got huge parts of the dialogue of that film in my head. And I just think there's something about it. I just think Richard O'Brien has created a unique weirdness that totally transcends time, and even now is like completely beguiling and engrossing and all the rest of it. So yeah, it started out as sheer weirdness and then became a bit of a love affair with this thing that almost defies categorization.
Have you done the sing along then? Have you been to, I mean, when you were in London?
I've never done the sing along. I've never seen the stage play. I did buy the soundtrack, probably in like 3 different formats, but I couldn't tell you the last time I listened to it.
I had a writer on called Richard Cabot who did punk films influenced by punk. Oh, there's the first bell. And he cited the Rocky Horror Picture Show as being a punk film. Because what I didn't realise is the stage play was like took place on the King's Road, all that kind of cross-dressing,
for sure. Yeah.
Gender not being clear, suspenders and all that kind of S&M, alluding to S&M and stuff, and then you get Vivienne Westwood and her shop, and it's like you can't imagine there wasn't an influence from the stage show and therefore the film.
Well, maybe that's another subconscious part of it, is like the provenance of things that you go on to love. You sort of then start to appreciate the backwards referencing. But yeah, just even now I haven't quite encountered a film like it. So in terms of like formative storytelling, it definitely stuck with me.
I think it's that classic thing about, and obviously you appreciate this from the films you've made. It's like there is no secret sauce to making a successful film, and as Richard O'Brien has proven, like the person who gave us this, then the things he's tried to do afterwards, were interesting, but they never hit the zeitgeist like
yeah. I think the only secret sauce in it.
At Kroger, we want our fresh produce to meet your expectations, which is why we're dedicated to doing up to a 27-point inspection on our fruits and veggies, checking for things like scarring. In fact, only the best produce like zesty oranges and crisp carrots reach our shelves. Because when it comes to fresh, our higher standards mean fresher produce. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
It probably sounds lame to say, is having a determination for yourself and fulfilling that determination and sort of trying not to worry about anything else. But again, film is so mercurial. Half the time it's compromise, and the other half the time it's stuff that you didn't even anticipate that's kind of ruining your endeavors. But yeah, I think he set out to do something very close to what he achieved, and I think that's why it's a success.
Right then, moving swiftly along to 1981 with American Wealth in London. Do you recall where you saw this first? Is this another TV, black and white TV on your own?
I genuinely think it is. I think I went through maybe a year of catching things that I shouldn't and wouldn't have been aware of and shouldn't have probably been watching. And more surely than the Rocky Horror Picture version of it, I think it absolutely was one of those things that I watched under the bed covers, probably at a similar age, probably without my parents' knowledge. And again, it was just such a visceral experience. Like probably my first memory of American Wealth in London was the scene where Jack gets taken on the moors. And I just remember the execution of that scene being so terrifying. It's the first time I remember watching film and feeling scared, I think is the honest truth. Like scared for reasons of like, understanding the reasons I was scared for reasons of like having witnessed something violent and having it totally seared into your cortex. And I think when I came to watch it for a second time, I was maybe quite worried about watching that scene again because it was kind of so effective in how it made you imagine what was going on in that moment. But then beyond that, just all kinds of other emotions. Like it is such an emotive movie. Like you wouldn't get away now with making a film that was so tonally agnostic, that wasn't particularly trying to exist in a certain genre. And
no.
You know, most people will tell you it's a horror, or maybe some people will tell you it's a comedy horror because it's John Landis, and you know you have all the stuff with Frank Oz and the kind of knockabout detectives and all the rest of it. But it's kind of also a love story, and it's also pretty sexy in places, and it's also a story about male friendship, and there's all these things going on, and you'd never get away. Probably for marketing reasons and audience targeting reasons, you never get away now with the idea of having a film that was so unsure of its tone, yet so successful in telling a story that kept you engaged. And then probably the cherry on the cake of that would be the fact that sort of possibly pre-ILM, but pre my knowledge of ILM and moving to VFX and all the rest of it, everything was really about the height of on-screen SFX and the stuff that Rick Baker was doing in that movie, and the werewolf transformation that is in camera.
Yeah.
You're watching this in-camera sequence, and it's totally mind-bending. Probably also gave me an appreciation of what you can do in film, like grounded stuff that's completely otherworldly, and just the excitement of all that. And just a film that I've gone back to repeatedly, and I probably couldn't cite every line in the way that I could cite every line from Rocky Horror Picture Show. But just something that could be so funny, so scary, so sexy, all rolled into one. Just kind of feels like a gift of a film experience. And again, a bit like Rocky Horror, I can't really find its equivalent film. You know, you look at other comedy horrors if you want to cite it like that. You know, Shaun of the Dead is not like American Werewolf in London. I think most comedy horrors decide they're either going to be a horror, but a slightly sloppy one, or they decide they're going to be a comedy with a bit of gross out. And you know, we made Double Date, so we made that decision. We were making a comedy with a bit of gross out. But American Werewolf in London has genuine horror, terrifying horror, and has genuine comedy, and the two somehow can seem to exist in the same world.
Yeah, I mean, me as a child seeing this, and then as an adult going on the tube for the first time. I mean, and then sort of once I was living in London. once I was living in London and those late night tubes home, no matter, it's weird how your id just goes, this is this. It's not even the same station. It's just your immediate thought is, this is like American for London.
What does good horror do? Like, you're afraid to go back in the water. That was the power of Jaws. You're totally right. Like, crossing a park at night or being in the underground when there was no one else in the station is a completely transformative experience once you've seen American Werewolf. You just can't get away from it. So that's the power of effective horror. But he was just also being so much more playful than that. And I had no appreciation of John Landis. It's not like I'd climbed up through his films or I'd seen Animal House or whatever it was. I was just taking it completely at face value, and I just thought it was so effective. Added to that, I probably did slightly fall in love with Jenny Agutter. Don't know how old Jenny Agutter was in that movie, but the scene that also got me into Van Morrison, where Moondance plays over the top, gave me an early cinematic crush. And then Griffin Dunne as well. I just thought Griffin Dunne is an incredible actor, and the stuff with him in the cinema with David, where he's kind of the decomposing corpse, it's just like brilliant moment.
You're right. I mean, it's weird. Until you said it, I hadn't really thought about it. I never heard that expression before. Genre agnostic. I think it's a really useful expression, because it's probably the most successful one at it in terms of it. And it is right. You the reason you enjoy the film is, like you say, the buddy movie you watch, the love story you watch, the fantastic monster creature feature you watch, and then the gags.
and the gags are genuinely funny, but also you just reminded me of some more scares, like the sequence where he wakes up from a nightmare 3 times, and the nightmare is progressively more horrible. Again, totally messed me up. Like
the Nazi zombies, you mean?
The people in masks who come and shoot up the house, and then him waking up with the face of a monster, and then him in the forest biting the neck of that deer. This is all like really iconically scary shit.
Interesting. You said you probably saw it first on television. The original cuts on television didn't include the Nazi zombies in the dream sequence. That was cut from a lot.
Maybe I saw that on subsequent.
Yeah,
views.
I mean, I don't know when it became. I mean, it's on. You see it now if it's on television, but there was a period when there was cuts versions of it where. Because that is a genuine. There's no other way to read that scene. It's just terrifying.
Yeah, it's deeply terrifying. And so I probably carried a love around of this film with a kind of equal disturbedness of this film, but it certainly didn't turn me away from horror. And it might have been my gateway drug into seeking more dark and depraved things along the way. But also, obviously, John Landis, has done some brilliant comedy. So
indeed,
kind of hand in hand.
Which is a lovely segue. So we're now going to do a brilliant comedy. 1985's The Breakfast Club.
John Hughes. What can you say? Like, there's probably not really a John Hughes film that I don't love. And there might be other contenders for the throne. I mean, obviously, Ferris Bueller holds a very warm place in my heart. But I probably saw The Breakfast Club later than Rocky Horror and American Werewolf. But maybe not that much later. Maybe I was about 15 or something. And I guess the deal with that film was I probably felt like spoken to. And I know it was written by like a 50-year-old man or whatever. But I think I think you always engage with the film that you feel like you can relate to or is saying something about a universe that you understand. But it's not always that a film is speaking directly to you. And I know it's an American high school and all the rest of it. But I think I just felt like the teenage voices in that film, however slightly tweaked or contrived and however deliberately tropey in terms of the tribes and all the rest of it, was just sort of speaking to me. And I think I just wanted to lean in. I almost wanted detention. I wanted to be a part of that crowd. And, you're supposed to identify with Emilio Estevez, but secretly you want to be Judd Nelson, depending on your gender or your proclivities or all the rest of it. And there's always the girl that you're supposed to relate to. And, you're probably supposed to fancy Molly Ringwald, but actually I was into Ali Sheedy because of the slightly gothic leaning on my own part. But just the dialogue and the characters and the situation, it felt real, it felt relatable, it felt pretty vital at the time. And also the cleverness of this really simple device, which is like, you know, they're going to get on, you know, they're going to find a way out of it. You know that the loners are going to find friendship and all the rest of it. But really what you're asking yourself is, what did they do to get detention? And the way they decided that he decides to deliver this isn't through like flashbacks or taking you out of the space or taking you out of the sequence. It's spending time with them and imagining the thing that they did. And things like Emilio Estevez's story where he talks about how they were terrible to that kid in the locker room. He's just telling you a story, but you feel like you've seen that. It's 100% absolutely in your head, and kind of listening to all the different permutations of what brought them there on that Saturday morning. I just thought was like really immediate and clever storytelling. And a weird thing popped into my head a couple of days ago when I was thinking about it, which is the sort of a Reservoir Dogsy thing here, which is things have happened that you were never part of. And I know in Reservoir Dogs he kind of gives you glimpses of it, but things have happened that you were never a part of, and you're just really enjoying the aftermath of that and the fallout of that, and seeing how these people are gonna get through the situation. And I think it's a lot harder to do that and to make that play and to make that not seem like theatre.
Yeah. It is in a way. It's a classic chamber piece, isn't it? I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's 100% a classic chamber piece, but actually, chamber pieces often feel like theatre, and they often you often tire of it, or it often sags in certain parts of it. And I just felt like I was in that classroom, and I really wanted to enter the life of those kids. And you know, the fact that he was an older guy, but had obviously had an ear for teen dialogue or teen angst or whatever it was, just really had an impression on me at the right time in my life, I think. So.
I think one of the things they got dead right was that idea of when they started to sort of feel around, and I don't mean that physically, just like when they started to get to know each other, because usually in a chamber piece like this, it's like it's 5 strangers, but these are 5 strangers because they're from 5 tribes as far as
different cliques,
as far
100%.
as school goes, so they don't know each other. So they're trying to get each other's truth out of each other. So when they begin to have fun, which is what young people like to do because that's an immediate thing, the minute the fun stops, they're back to being tribes. So they're like they let the guard down, and I thought that was really sweet. That's a really sweet part of the movie.
And they don't have the protection of the rest of their tribe, so there's a lot of vulnerability there. But I also like the fact that like the smartest person in that building is the janitor, and he's also someone who's been like totally overlooked. And also the relationship with the Paul Gleason character, like just how aggressive and insidious the authority figure was in that story, like to an extreme. But yeah, I did develop probably a bit of a Judd Nelson obsession after that, and was desperately seeking out like New Jack City or whatever it was. Probably lots of obscure titles that have kind of drifted into the mist. But Judd Nelson was probably the James Dean of my teenage years, put it that way.
I think he wishes he was.
Maybe didn't survive it.
Yeah. And I guess the one last thing to say about The Breakfast Club is that it's a film where a piece of music gets owned by the film.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Simple Minds.
That iconic image of him with his fist in the air and the freeze frame at the end. But I learned many years later that was one of the few songs that Simple Minds didn't actually write.
Oh, wow.
It was written for them and they performed it. And I don't know if that's a bit of an annoyance for Jim Kerr that actually the song that everybody loves is one of the few that he didn't actually write. But anyway.
Blimey, O'Reilly. Well, look, that was the bell for the last 5 minutes. That's your 3 films that impacted everything in your adult life. It's nice to hear about a bit of technology, which is now redundant, the TV with tape.
It's with tape and radio. I mean, I don't know where it is. It might be in my parents' garage now, and it probably doesn't work. Also, the TV screen was genuinely tiny, so I must have been like nose to the glass trying to watch it.
I must admit, it's a piece that was passed me by. I don't think I ever saw one.
I'll see if I can find it and photograph it for you.
Nice.
But no, look, it was my gateway to sort of naughty midnight film watching, and it probably exposed me to a lot of stuff too early. But it's also led to me having a career in film, so maybe it wasn't the worst thing.
Brilliant. Good luck with the release of The Last Sentinel. And it just gives me to say thank you very much for giving us your time on the podcast.
Thank you, mate. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to listening to it.